The Sacred Vault, a novel, by Andy McDermott. Narrated by Gildart Jackson. Copyright 2010 by Andy McDermott. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Bantam Dell, an imprint of the Random House Publishing Group, a division of Random House Incorporated, and was produced in the year 2011 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Prologue. Italy. It was a cold, crisp mid-November evening, but Giancarlo Mistretta's mind was already on Christmas as he guided his tanker along the winding road through the Casentinesi forest. His apartment would play host to the celebrations this year, 23 people to cater for, maybe 24 if his sister's newest baby arrived earlier than expected. He pushed his plans aside as a tight turn appeared in the headlights. Slowing the truck to a near crawl, he checked his watch. Slightly ahead of schedule. There was still one more gas station to supply before he could return to the depot, but he would be back home in Florence before 7. Then maybe he and Leani could advance their plan for a baby of their own. He guided the tanker around the corner, then braked. A charcoal-grey BMW was slewed across the road, one wheel in the ditch. A woman in a dark suit waved for him to stop. Giancarlo suppressed a sigh. The BMW was blocking his way. So much for getting home early. Still, he wouldn't be setting much of an example for any future little Giancarlos if he didn't help a lady in distress. He stopped, taking a closer look at the woman. Long, glossy black hair and dark skin. Indian, perhaps. Probably in her late 20s and quite attractive in a businesslike way. He could almost hear Leani reprimanding him for that, but married or not, he still had eyes, didn't he? The woman walked toward the truck. Giancarlo climbed out to meet her. "Hi!" he called. "Looks like you could use some help." She looked briefly into the woods as she advanced. Giancarlo noticed that her features were marred. Only her left eye had moved, the right staring fixedly at him. The pale line of a scar ran from forehead to cheek over the socket. A glass eye. He glanced at the BMW. "Are you stuck? I can give you a—" She whipped out a silenced handgun and shot him 3 times in the face. Giancarlo's lifeless body slumped to the tarmac. A man stepped out of the darkness of the woods, tall, muscular, and dressed entirely in black. Urbano Fernandez regarded the corpse with an expression of mock apology. "Poor fellow," he said. The language was English, but the accent was smoothly Spanish. "Never any pleasantries with you, are there?" he went on as the woman holstered the gun. "A waste of time," said Madirashki Dagdu coldly. As the unfortunate Giancarlo had guessed, she was Indian, her accent thick and stilted. English was a language in which she had only recently needed proficiency. She indicated the truck driver's body. "Dispose of that." Fernandez snapped a sarcastic salute. "Yes, ma'am." He pulled on a pair of black leather gloves, pausing to brush his pencil moustache with his fingertips before dragging the corpse into the undergrowth. "You didn't have to be here at all. We don't need to be, nursemaided." He knew full well what the word was, but took a certain amusement from her frown of deep concentration as she tried to translate it. "This operation is more expensive than the others," she said once the meaning had come to her. "My employers want to be sure their money is being used well." "It will be worth every dollar," said Fernandez, dumping the body. There was no point concealing it. The area would be crawling with police soon enough. He went to the tanker. "Now, go. Meet me down the road." Madirakshi returned to the BMW without a word. Fernandez watched her, thinking it was a shame such an attractive figure was wasted on an ugly personality, then moved to the valves on the tanker's side as the car reversed out of the shallow ditch. Even after delivering most of the day's supplies, the tanker still contained more than 500 gallons of gas. The Spaniard turned the wheel above one of the gaping stainless steel nozzles. Fuel gushed out. He winced at the sharp smell, backing away to avoid being splashed as he opened the valve wider. The gush became a geyser, spraying into the woods. He climbed into the cab. The engine was still running, so he released the brake and depressed the heavy clutch to put the truck into gear, slowly following the BMW as it sped away. Gas spewed over Giancarlo Mistretta's corpse as the tanker rumbled into the night. A quarter-mile down the road, Fernandez saw the waiting BMW's headlights. He pulled over, then hurried to the car. Madirakshi's only greeting was a cold look. Fernandez ignored it. After tonight, there was only one more job planned, which might not even be necessary if his employers were persuasive enough, and then he would be rid of them and all the freaks in their entourage. Even before he had fastened his seat-belt, the BMW surged past the tanker, heading back up the road. A smeared pool of blood marked where the driver had been shot. Madirakshi stopped level with it. Fernandez lowered his window. He took a Zippo lighter from a pocket and with a single practiced move flicked it open and lit it. A moment to regard his reflection in the polished metal, then he tossed the lighter into the trees. Even before it hit the ground, the results were explosive. The highly flammable vapor rising from the pool of gas ignited, a fireball boiling upward into the trees and setting them alight. Giancarlo's fuel-soaked body was consumed by the inferno as easily as the branches. A thick trail of flames raced away down the road. Fernandez shielded his face from the heat with one gloved hand. "Time we left! Quickly!" Madirakshi needed no further prompting. The BMW roared away. Fernandez looked back as the car reached the corner to see a huge explosion rip through the forest a quarter-mile behind as the tanker blew up, a seething mushroom cloud of blazing orange and yellow rising into the night sky as flaming fuel rained down around it. A moment later, the blast reached him, an earth-shaking thump followed by a thunderous roar of air being pulled in to feed the conflagration. "Perfect," said Fernandez. "Now for stage 2." The BMW raced through the darkened forest, heading for the city of Florence, as the trees behind it turned into a wall of fire. The banging of the chair stopped as Bracco Zek pointed his gun at the young woman tied to it. "Cut that out," he said in fluent Italian. "I told you, do what we say and you'll live." He dragged the chair and its gagged occupant away from the wall, then returned to the small apartment's living room. 6 other black-clad men and their equipment occupied most of the space, but he pushed through them to the window, peeling back his dark balaclava to reveal a weather-worn face, hair shaved down to a grey stubble. Deep creases across his forehead showed that he had witnessed and endured far more than most men of his 34 years. The mercenaries had taken over the apartment that afternoon, Zek tricking the woman into letting them in by claiming to be delivering a parcel. She had been selected during the operation's exacting planning phase, being the only single occupant of any of the suitable top-floor apartments on the narrow Via degli Alfani. Considering what was across the street, it was perhaps inevitable that she was an aspiring artist. He looked out at the 18th-century buildings, the museum complex containing the Galleria dell'Accademia, one of Florence's top tourist attractions and home to one of the world's most famous pieces of art. Their target. Zek's phone rang. "Fernandez." "Yes?" "We're here. Let us in." The Bosnian craned his neck for a better look at the street below. 2 figures passed under a streetlight, approaching briskly, Fernandez and the Indian woman. The creases in Zek's forehead deepened. To him, Dagdu's presence was almost insulting, a sign that their employer didn't trust them to carry out the job without supervision. Weren't all their previous successes, including stealing a set of Chinese terracotta warriors out of their museum in Xi'an and removing one of Islam's holiest relics from Mecca itself, enough to prove their prowess? And Interpol was no nearer to catching them now than after their first commission 8 months earlier. Fernandez's inside knowledge of how the police worked, how they thought, kept them several steps ahead. He suppressed his annoyance. She was their paymaster's representative after all, and went back to the hall as the entry buzzer rasped. He pushed the button, then waited with slight anxiety for them to climb the stairs, if any of the other residents chose that moment to leave their apartment and saw their faces. But there were no such problems. The soft clump of boots outside, then a single sharp rap on the door. Zek opened it, and Fernandez and his companion entered. The Spaniard shared a brief smile of greeting with his second-in-command. "Anything to report?" "You've made the evening news," Zek told him. "The fire's spreading. They're calling in fire trucks from every surrounding town, and," he added meaningfully, "helicopters." "Excellent!" Fernandez dialed a number on his phone. "Status?" "Air traffic control has our flight plan," said the voice at the other end of the line. "We're ready." "Then go!" He disconnected. "Where's the roof access?" Zek pointed at a skylight. "Okay, let's get into position." He moved to address the rest of the team. Madirakshi, behind him, looked into the bedroom. "What is this?" she snapped on seeing the prisoner. "She won't be a problem," said Zek. "She hasn't seen our faces." Madirakshi's expression was as fixed as her artificial eye. "No witnesses." She stepped into the bedroom. The bound woman, facing away from the door, twisted against her restraints, making panicked noises. She didn't need to understand English to recognize the dangerous tone of the new arrival's voice. "If you shoot her, the neighbors might hear," Fernandez warned. "I don't need a gun." She stopped directly behind the other woman, whose muffled cries became more desperate. "Leave her," said Zek, coming into the room. "I promised she would live if she caused no trouble." Madirakshi ignored him. She placed her fingers against her right eye socket and pressed. There was a soft sucking sound, and with a faint plop something dropped into her waiting palm. Her glass eye, glistening wetly. Zek had seen many horrific things in his life, but the casual way the woman removed the prosthetic still produced a small shudder of revulsion. Disgust then turned to confusion as she took hold of the eye with both hands and twisted it. There was a click, and it split into two hemispherical halves. What was she doing? The answer came as she drew her hands apart. Coiled inside the eye was a length of fine steel wire. By the time Zek realized it was a garrote, Madirakshi had looped it around the defenseless young woman's throat and pulled it tight. "No!" Zek gasped, but Fernandez put a firm hand on his shoulder to pull him back. The Italian woman couldn't even cry out, her airway crushed by the razor-sharp wire. She convulsed against the ropes. The chair thumped on the floor. Madirakshi pulled harder, sawing the wire through skin and flesh. Blood flowed down the woman's neck. Her fingers clenched and clawed, then relaxed. One last bump, and the chair fell still. Madirakshi unwound the garrote and turned. For the first time Zek saw her face as it really was, a sunken hole with the eyelids gaping like a tiny mouth where her right eye should have been. Another revolted shudder, accompanied by anger. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "No witnesses," the Indian repeated. She took out a cloth and ran it down the length of the blood-coated wire. The garrote clean, she recoiled it, then fastened the two halves of the eye back into a single sphere. Snick! Another practice move, and with a small but unsettling noise of suction, the prosthetic was returned to its home. "Now, you have a job to do." "We do," said Fernandez before Zek could respond. He leaned closer to his lieutenant, adding in a low voice, "I think perhaps having a baby has made you go a little soft, Braco. If this is going to be a problem—" "No problem," said Zek stiffly, "but I promised her." "Never make promises you might not be able to keep," Fernandez told him, before clicking his fingers. The men in the living room looked around as one, ready for action. 10 minutes later, all 8 mercenaries were on the apartment's sloping roof. Fernandez peered over the edge. Below, Madirakshi left the building. Relieved to be rid of her at last, he backed up and faced his team. "Ready?" The responses were all in the affirmative. Each man was now armed. Compact MP5K submachine guns fitted with laser sights and suppressors slung on their backs. Other pieces of gear were attached to the harnesses they wore, not mere equipment webbing, but parachute-style straps able to support their body weight and more. The Spaniard looked at his watch. 5 minutes to get everyone across to the roof of the Galleria dell'Accademia, another 5 to eliminate the guards and secure the room containing their target, 5 more to prepare it and themselves for extraction. 15 minutes to carry out the most audacious robbery in history. He gestured to one of his men, Franco, who had already secured one end of a line inside the open skylight, and the other end was a barbed metal spear currently loaded into a custom-built gas-powered launcher. Franco had already selected his target, a squat brick ventilation blockhouse poking up from the Galeria's roof like a periscope. He tilted up the launcher. Fernandez watched him closely. This was a wild-card moment, the biggest risk in any operation. If the brickwork was too weak to take the weight, if someone heard the noise of the launch or clang of impact and looked up at the wrong moment, at least they could minimize the chances of the last. Franco raised a thumb. Another man, Sklar, held up a string of firecrackers, lit the fuse, and flung them down the street. There was a small square at the Galleria's southwestern corner. The fireworks landed at its edge. People jumped at the string of little explosions. Once the initial fright passed, some onlookers were annoyed, others amused by the display, but they were all looking at the ground. "Now," said Fernandez. Franco pulled the trigger. There was a flat thud as compressed nitrogen gas blasted the spear across the street, and a sharp clang as the spearhead pierced the blockhouse. All eyes below were still on the firecrackers. Franco put down the launcher and tugged on the line, gingerly at first, then harder. The spear held. He pulled a lever on the launcher's side to engage a winch mechanism and quickly drew the line taut. Fernandez gestured to a third man, Christoph, the smallest and lightest member of the team. The German gave the line a tug of his own to reassure himself that it would hold, then clipped his harness to it and carefully lowered himself off the roof. The others held their breaths. If the spear came loose, it was all over. Suspended below the line, Christoph pulled himself across the street. The cable shuddered but held firm. Fernandez didn't take his eyes off the spear. The crackle of fireworks had stopped, and now he could hear the crunch of broken bricks shifting against one another. Christoph reached the Galleria's roof. Mass exhalation. Fernandez realized he was sweating despite the cold. Christoph detached himself from the line, then secured it around the blockhouse. Thumbs up. Fernandez hooked himself to the cable and pulled himself across, followed in rapid succession by the others. He checked his watch as the last man reached the Galleria. They had made it with 30 seconds to spare. Now for the next stage. He took out his phone and entered another number. He didn't lift it to his ear as he pushed the final button, though. He was listening for something else. In a Florentine suburb 2 miles to the southwest, 2 cars had been parked, one at each end of an unremarkable street. Each car contained just over a pound of C4 explosive, wired to a detonator triggered by a cell phone. The phones had been cloned, all shared the same number, ringing simultaneously. An electrical impulse passed through the detonator. By the time the booms reached the Galleria dell'Accademia, 8 seconds later, the men on the roof were already moving toward their next objectives. They raced across the rooftops, splitting into 4 teams of 2 men each. Zek and Franco made up one team, reaching their destination first as the others continued past. The pair dropped onto a section of flat roof where large, humming air-conditioning units kept the museum's internal temperature constant. There was a small window just below the eaves of the abutting, slightly taller building. Zek shone a penlight inside, an office as expected. A glance below the frame revealed a thin electrical cable. The window was rigged with an alarm. He took a black box from his harness, uncoiling wires and digging a sharp-toothed crocodile clip deeply into the cable to bite the copper wire within. A second clip was affixed on the other side of the window. He pushed a button on the box. A green light came on. Franco took out a pair of wire cutters and with a single snip severed the cable between the clips. The light stayed green. Zek touched his throat mic to key it. "We're in." Inside the museum, lights of the halls and galleries were dimmed to the softest glow. Had it been up to the curators, they would have been switched off entirely to prevent the artwork from fading, but the security guards' inconvenient human need for illumination had required a compromise. The Galleria dell'Accademia is not an especially large museum, so the night watch usually consists only of 6 men. Despite the cultural value of the exhibits to the Italian people, this seemingly small staff is not an issue. Any kind of alarm would normally result in a rapid police response. But on this night, the police had other concerns. 2 guards entered one of the upper-floor galleries. Familiarity had turned the art treasures into mundane furniture. the monotony of patrolling the halls punctuated only by check-ins with the security office. So the unexpected crackle of one man's walkie-talkie got their attention. The next check wasn't due for 20 minutes. "What's up?" "Probably nothing," came the static-laden reply. "But Hall 3 has gone dark. Can you look?" "No problem," said the guard, giving his companion a wry look. That passed as excitement in their job, checking for faulty light bulbs. They made their way to a short flight of steps. It was immediately clear there was something wrong with the lights in Hall 3, only darkness visible beyond the entrance. One guard took a flashlight from his belt, and they advanced into the gallery. Nothing seemed out of place in the beam. The second man shrugged, turning to try the light switches. A pair of eyes seemed to float in the blackness before him. Before he could make a sound, he was hit in the heart by 2 bullets from Zek's MP5K, the suppressor muting the noise of the shots to nothing more than sharp chacks. His partner whirled, and a gloved hand clamped over his mouth, Franco's black-bladed combat knife stabbing deep into his throat. Both bodies were hauled into the shadows. Zek pulled up his balaclava and took the dead guard's walkie-talkie. "Something's buzzing," he said in Italian, the radio's low fidelity disguising his voice. "The camera might have shorted out. Can you check the system?" "I'll run a diagnostic. Hold on." Zek dropped the walkie-talkie. The computer would spend the next 30 seconds checking the various cameras and alarms around the building, eventually coming to the conclusion that the camera in Hall 3 was malfunctioning, unsurprising since he had shot it. But while the computer was busy, the security systems would be down. He keyed the throat mic. 2 down. Go. Fernandez and Sklar were suspended on lines hanging from the roof on the southern side of a courtyard, waiting for Zek's signal. The instant it came, Fernandez kicked open an upper-floor window and swung inside, unslinging his gun. The Ukrainian jumped down beside him. He and his team had reconnoitered the Galleria multiple times over the past month, and he knew exactly where he had entered the building, the upper level of the main stairwell. Right now, another team was also entering on the ground floor. This part of the mission was a hunt and a race against time. Find the remaining guards and kill them before they could raise the alarm. Fernandez knew where 2 of them would be, the security control room. He and Sklar hurried down the staircase. The position of the remaining 2 guards was another wild card, which was why he had chosen entry points that would let his team spread out as quickly as possible. Speed and surprise were everything. It only took one guard to push a panic button. They reached the ground floor, 15 seconds before the cameras came back online. Sklar haired off into the main entrance hall. Fernandez, meanwhile, shoved through a door marked Privado and threaded his way along a narrow corridor. Another door, 5 seconds left. He raised his gun and kicked it open. The guard seated in front of the security monitors looked around in surprise. "Chuck, chuck, chuck!" The guard crashed off his chair, arms spasming in reflexive response to the 3 bullets that had just slammed into his skull, splattering blood across the blank monitor screens. Shit! Where was the other man? The diagnostic ended, and the monitors came back to life. He spotted one of his men in the Salle Byzantine, another in the Salle Fiorentine. Where were the guards? There, in the Salone del Colosso. Sklar would be closest to them. Both guards fell, thrashing in their noiseless death throes as a burst from Sklar's silenced MP5K cut them down. Confirmation came through his earpiece. 2 down. Just one man left, but where? The answer was almost comical in its obviousness. Fernandez rushed out of the control room and headed back up the passage to another door marked WC. He opened it, a small tiled room, 2 stalls, 1 closed. The rapid chucks from the gun were louder in here, echoing in the confined space. The stall's wooden door splintered, a startled gasp coming from behind it, along with clanks of shattering porcelain and the dull thud of lead entering flesh. A trickle of water ran out from beneath the door, pinkish rivulets spreading through it. 6 guards dealt with. Fernandez hurried back into the museum proper, turning left in the entrance hall and looking down the length of the gallery to see his target at the far end. Michelangelo's David. Possibly the most famous sculpture in the world. The Renaissance masterpiece towered above its viewers, more than 16 feet tall, even without its pedestal. During the day, illuminated mainly by light coming through the glass dome in the ceiling, the marble statue was a soft off-white, almost blending into the blandly painted walls of the semicircular chamber in which it stood. But at night, side-lit and with its surroundings in shadow, the naked figure stood out starkly, appearing almost threatening, a faint sneer of disdain visible on the young future king's lips as he prepared to face Goliath in combat. To Fernandez the image seemed appropriate. After all, he was the David who defeated the Goliath in the world's combined law enforcement agencies. "You haven't done it yet," he warned himself as he marched toward the statue, passing more of Michelangelo's sculptures along the way. 3 of his men were already waiting at David's feet, and he heard footsteps behind, Zek and Franco. As for the last 2 team members, he looked up at the dome, catching a glimpse of movement outside. They were right where they should be. Everything was on schedule. "You know what to do," he announced as he reached the statue. "Let's make history." "Or take history," said Zek. The 2 men grinned, then everyone moved into action. One man ran to a control panel on one wall. It was protected by a locked metal cover, but a moment's effort with the crowbar took care of that. The others went to the statue itself. Christoph and Franco climbed onto the plinth, their heads reaching only to David's mid-thigh. They took out coiled straps, wider and much thicker than their own harnesses, and carefully secured them around the statue's legs. Once they were in place, Christoph took out another coil and, keeping hold of the buckle at one end, tossed it upward. It arced over the statue's shoulder, dropping down on the other side like a streamer. Another man caught the coil and passed it back between David's legs to Franco, who ran it through the buckle, connecting it to the leg strap and pulled it tight. The process was repeated with the second strap over the other shoulder. Christoph quickly used the straps to scale the stone figure's chest, hanging on with one hand as more straps were thrown to him. Fernandez looked on as his plan literally took shape before his eyes. The growing web was much like the harnesses he and his men were wearing, designed to spread out the weight of the body over as great an area as possible when it was lifted. In the case of David, that weight was more than 6 tons, plus the pedestal, but that had been planned for. The Spaniard gestured to the man at the control panel. He pushed a button. A hydraulic rumble came from the floor. Very slowly, the statue began to rise. At considerable expense, the Galleria had recently installed a system to protect the David from vibrations, whether in the form of earthquakes, city traffic, or even the constant footsteps of visitors. Powerful shock absorbers under the pedestal shielded it from tremors, but also allowed it to be elevated for those rare occasions when the statue had to be moved. At full height, there was just enough space for a forklift's blades to slip beneath the base. That was all the space Fernandez needed. Zek and the other men at the statue pushed more straps, thicker still and bearing heavy-duty metal D-rings, under the base. Once that was done, they fastened them over the pedestal, then began to secure the harnesses to them. Fernandez took out his phone again, dialing the first number he had called earlier. The answer was heavily obscured by noise. "We're less than 2 minutes out, but ATC's issued an alert about us being off course." "We're almost ready," said Fernandez. "Just follow the plan." He disconnected, hearing knocking from the dome. One of the 2 figures outside gave him a thumbs up. Zek rounded the statue. "All set. I just hope the harness holds." "It'll hold," Fernandez assured him. He raised his voice. "Move back!" Everyone cleared the area beneath the dome. The men on the roof had also retreated, one of them pushing a button on a control box. The explosive charges they had placed around the dome detonated as one. Glass panels shattered into 1 billion fragments, the severed steel framework plunging down into the gallery and smashing the marble floor. The horrendous noise echoed through the museum's halls, followed by the piercing shrieks of sirens as vibration sensors throughout the building were triggered. The police would be on their way, but with attention diverted by the forest fire to the east and the car bombings to the southwest, their response time would be slowed, their numbers reduced. And Fernandez and his men would be gone. The two men who had planted the explosives were already rappelling into the museum as the others quickly cleared the wreckage out of the way. Even over the alarms, the Spaniard could hear another sound, a thudding bass pounding, getting louder and louder.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?